welcome back to Call the Damn Leads, the show by sales professionals for sales professionals. I'm your host, Drew B. Wilson. With more than 2 decades in sales, I've seen it, been through it, heard about it. Now I'm bringing it to you, my favorite people in the world, the sales community. Because let's be honest, this is the greatest job on earth. It doesn't matter where you come from, what background, what personality type, what gender, you can make an amazing life in sales. And today's guest, no stranger to the journey, Miss Becky Heidesch.
That's correct.
All right, nailed it. Awesome. Well, listen, Becky, I appreciate you being here. I want to jump right in. I want to hear your crazy sales story.
Oh, gosh. So, I mean, probably like your listeners and like yourself, I wasn't trained in sales, never took a sales class. But I think every entrepreneur, jumps in and, like all of the responsibilities that you have to juggle as an entrepreneur. I mean, sales is key, right? So I've learned a lot over a 30-year kind of career. I think one of the things that I would say to my younger self or to anybody starting out or anywhere they are in the field is to, in any business, I really believe you are selling all the time, right? I mean, you are selling yourself. There's a couple things that you're doing all the time in your career. And one of them is interviewing. You're always interviewing and you're always selling. Some people will look at it like a soft sale, right? But it's always going on and it's always part of what you're doing. And one of the things I would say, I've had such an interesting kind of path and career of doing a number of different jobs and careers that I've sold different products and services along the way in different industries. And so if I had to say anything, one of the things for people that stay in the same lane and they do the same thing, typically their network and the work that they do is, it follows them. But when you work in multiple industries and you sell different services and you play different roles, you are in a lot of different networks. And so, there are times that sometimes somebody wasn't interested in this product or service I was selling at this particular time in my career. But had I have maintained contact with them over these decades and things, there were certain times that I noticed that, oh, this would have been perfect for that particular client at this particular time. So one of the things I would say is to focus on really the relationship and not the transaction. And I think that's one of the things in terms of my biggest sales stories and things. I've had so many like crashes and burns, and sales meetings and things where you figure things out later, maybe overselling a proposal, asking for too much going in, certain things. Some of the biggest, I would say, my successes or my team and I have been landing maybe Fortune 500 contracts in terms of recruiting. I remember one board search that we got that was very competitive. We were going up against a lot of other large firms for the particular role. And in the end, they had made the decision to go with a large firm, and then they came back and wanted a boutique, and we won that assignment. And that was a long sales cycle to get there, signing a large client for a multi-year contract. That was significant, doing something like that. So those have been, getting a contract with a billionaire was something that, or an assignment with a billionaire. That was that in itself was one. And I would say, selling and sales with some of the job roles. I think one of my, biggest positive kind of things that came out of selling was the job opportunities that I got, and working for side by side with the chairman of a board was really kind of a fun experience.
So I think that's one of the things for me that I love most about sales is that if you come in with the right attitude, and you work really hard and you skill set you continue to develop and you work on your skill sets, you're going to continue to find more opportunity. It's just going to it seems kind of woo-woo, but it just shows up in your lap. And I think it's so interesting how when an individual decides that they're going to take action and be successful in something, 9 out of 10 times they end up getting pretty dang close to having the success that they're looking for. So for you, I know you've done a lot within, the women's world, and you've created all sorts of different magazines and things. Like, how did you make sure to maintain that as you were focusing and building on these businesses, that you were able to stay focused on the right opportunities?
That's a great question, Dhruvi. I certainly didn't have a set out plan. I was really that young, naive entrepreneur that was just running on passion. And I was really looking for a job when I started my business. And I couldn't find a job. It was in sport. At the time, I wanted to make a transition into sports marketing on the women's side, and I couldn't find the job. So I created a publication to create my job. And that started opening up doors to job opportunities. It became a loss leader. And then I turned it into a sports marketing agency and ran with that for 10 years, and then turned that into, we had a career division in the agency. And so I turned that into a couple online career centers and then moved that into executive search. But I was reinventing kind of all along the way. And I picked industries and markets that weren't there yet. They weren't sustainable. They didn't have the legs to make it. So I was constantly having to kind of repivot, and how am I going to go here, and where am I going to generate revenue, and how are we going to survive? So that was really kind of the path on that. And I think, as you mentioned, having a passion. I think, you got to have a passion, because it's hard, no matter what you do, it's hard, and it's going to continuously be hard. But I think having that passion and that drive is really how you learn sales, I think.
Well, and it's one of the things, and I think that's how sales is such an interesting career, because a lot of people that are in sales, they're not in sales because they chose to go into sales. They're in sales because they didn't have a choice. They literally needed to go and make money and put food on the table, or put a roof over their head, or shoes on their kids' feet. And they said, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to figure out how to like convince someone to buy this thing so that I can make money and live my life. And what I think is really cool about it is a lot of the times the people that have come from those situations, the way that they start to develop the new systems and processes, it's what allows them to step into those industries that like either don't exist, or there's very minimal amount of case studies or success with it. So they're the ones that carve that path. They're the ones that are like literally creating these new industries and opportunities. And it sounds like that's kind of the path that you had to go on. And so as you shifted and pivoted and you made all these adjustments, which that's a whole probably several hour conversation we could have just by itself. But what was it that landed you and said, okay, this, the recruiting space that we're in now, this is what we really want to focus on?
It was really just a matter of survival, and also where we saw opportunity. And so, having started kind of on the sports side and the sports industry, and having had a publication in there targeted at women, and then moving into the career space, then the natural was, well, what can we do with this kind of in corporate America? And at the time, 20 some years ago, when we were doing women in diversity hiring, just getting a meeting was a success. It was, nobody was buying into that at that particular time. So we were in these markets and these segments so early that it was really hard to, that in a way it was a niche, right? But at the same point in time, you were just so early in a business, in a market, that you were constantly having to sell. Fast forward, right? Things have gone full circle the other direction. But you're constantly, I think one of the things I learned is how quickly business changes, over time, and how you have to, I moved into an online career center. All of a sudden we're running an online career center. I didn't have a technology background, we're doing this. So I think, it's just, and now with the rate and speed of how fast business is moving, you have no choice but to pivot at every turn and corner to stay afloat. So you're always looking ahead, and you've always got to be, now it's like, what's the latest AI? What's the latest technology? How am I going to stay up with social media? How are we going to do all of this? So that is just the nature of, I think, being an entrepreneur today. I think when it comes to the sales side of things, one of the things that I recognize, and I recognize this with having placed executives in multiple industries, there are folks that are just, they really, sales is their thing. They love people. They're really good at sales. They have those skills. And it's relational skills, really. But at the same, to be successful in any business, you also have to have that either ground level support coming up that's going to support the sales, right? That's going to support the commitments, that's going to support, what the individual is selling. And either you have to be that individual to follow up on all those details, or you better have a right hand that's going to follow up on the execution of the details. And I think, over time, myself and my partners, we would be in these meetings and things, and I've worked with a number of different companies and organizations, and I think of these two guys that are, good friends I like a lot, that I've had the opportunity to work with, and they're always selling and they're good at it. But sometimes, and I don't know if this has anything to do from a gender perspective, but my two partners that had been female, that we would think, oh, we can't sell that. We can't deliver on that. We can't sell that. So we're always very cautious about under promising and over delivering, and wanting that to be kind of our, that whatever we said we could do, we could do. But at the same point, we were always hesitant about upselling that if we were concerned about delivering. And I would see competitors just selling like crazy, whether they could deliver or not. So those were some of the things that I found interesting along my path.
I think there's so much truth to that, in that it's always best, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, but if you can under promise and over deliver, it's always going to create a way bigger lifetime value, way more referrals, reviews, all the things that allow you to grow and scale a business. Like, just that standard alone, under promise, over deliver, will do a world of amazing things. But I want to touch on something, because I think there's a lot of listeners who might be someone who have built an amazing career for themselves, and also they're starting to recognize that this may not be where they want to spend the rest of their life. Even if they've got 10, 15 years in, things are changing, right? It's not what it was when we started. I mean, a lot has changed in the world and industry in just the last 5 years. So what are like those big risks that people that are in those careers facing right now, and like how can they best prepare themselves?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, we are in really, volatile, vulnerable times where things are changing so quickly. We have so many. I recently, in my book that came out, I talk about job security, the first couple of chapters, because I think it's so critical for people to understand that we just don't have it anymore. I don't care if it's Fortune 500 or working for a nonprofit or working in, your own business or a startup. There's just no job security anymore, anywhere, for anyone. And I really want people to have that as a mindset, to think that way. The one thing about sales that I will say is that if you've got good, strong sales skills, then you can be marketable to multiple industries. It's not like certain skills and industry, certain fields that you're not marketable to multiple industries, but in sales, those are skills that can translate over. But for anybody that's looking for a career change that has good, strong sales skills, the first thing I would think is, I always say this too, you are qualified for the job that you're in. You are best qualified for the job that you're in. So if you're looking to make a transition, you're looking to make a change, the job that you are most qualified for, whether you like it or not, is the one that you're in. So something that looks similar to the one you're in is the one you're most qualified for. That doesn't mean you can't make a career transition, and that doesn't mean you can't change industries or job functions. But the distance between where you are and where you want to go will be longer, and the investment will be longer to get there. But having said that, the sales, I always, for somebody who's got good sales skills and they want to make a career transition today, I always try to get them to think about, the intersection of where your passions are, where your experience is, and where the opportunities are. If you can find that inner place, then that's where you're going to have your better opportunities. The other thing is to go to competitors. If you are working for Coca-Cola, then a Pepsi's going to be, somebody who's going to predominantly be interested in your background. So those are just kind of some really basic things in terms of looking at what you can do and where you can transfer skills.
I really appreciate that analogy that, sales can translate in so many different areas. This is why I try to tell people, if you can understand marketing and you can generate your own leads as a sales professional, you can write your own paycheck anywhere you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you said, there are some nuances to that in certain industries and knowledge and passion. And I think there's a big part of that because we've all met a sales professional who's really passionate about the thing that they sell. Like, you can feel the energy, you understand why you get it. And then we've all met the salesperson that's selling something that they're not passionate about, and it's really hard to work with them. Even if you're super passionate about the thing, if they're not passionate, you're just like, why don't you like this thing? Why are you not more excited? What's going on here? It creates a level of distrust or discongruence. And I think I love that the sales skills that people are learning from this show and from life in general, they will translate. But a heart surgeon can't go and become a mechanic. It doesn't work that way. I mean, maybe they could, but as you said, there's a longer cycle there. There's a process that they're going to have to go through. And the nice thing about sales is it's literally, who are we talking to? What are we helping them solve? What pain are we getting them out of? What pleasure are they getting in working with us? And how do we deliver on that? Pretty cut and dry for the most part. And what I think a lot of people in those career positions have to understand is that you can definitely transition and you can become an entrepreneur, but there's a lot of things you don't know about yet, which are, how do you do the marketing? How do you customer, acquisition? How do you make sure that the fulfillment, because when you're on your own, you do still have to underpromise and overdeliver. And so do you have any advice for someone who's maybe in a career and thinking about going down into the entrepreneurial space?
Yeah. So, most of Drewby, what I talk about and share are mistakes I've made, lessons I've learned, tips, tools, and strategies along the way. So I'm a big proponent of running your own business and being an entrepreneur. If it's the right time, you have the right resources, you've got a viable plan, and you have the skill set, meaning, and you don't have to have all of it, of course. I didn't have a lot of it, but the path will be longer and it will be a harder climb. So I would much rather see individuals be set up for success and do it at the right time. So I think, one of the things to think about is, what kind of business do you want to run? It's what kind of business do you want to run? Is it the right time in your life? Because as you know, and every entrepreneur knows, I mean, it's 24/7, it's around the clock. You are working. Do you have the resources you need from financial to team? And is it the right market timing and opportunity as well too? And so I think all of these things are important questions to ask. There's all kinds of businesses that any of us can run, right, or start up. But certainly, there are businesses that are easier to run than others, right? So one analogy I like to I can remember when I was younger and my parents had told me about some neighbors that were buying a storage unit business. And at the time I thought, gosh, that doesn't sound very exciting. Who would want to have kind of a business like that, then after running,
I know they make a lot of money. I want one of those businesses for sure.
Yeah. And then when you consider something like a restaurant, right? Where, look at the difference, like, a restaurant. And I was recently talking to my daughter about, like, in a restaurant business and think about, in a storage unit business. So this family that I knew that ran that. It's cement, storage unit, automated gate, not a whole lot. Grounds crew once in a while, clean it out, automated billing, very easy business. Then you go to like a restaurant where you're dealing with, not only do you need location, not only do you need equipment, you've got to have a good chef, right? You've got to have the marketing. So you need the right menu. You've got to have the website, you're dealing with a supply chain there and getting in the ingredients you need and keeping it refrigerated and, ongoing, right? So there, and then you've got to have, your waitresses and, whatever it is you're going to have. So you have all of these different things that are so much different, payroll, hiring, than you have over here. So I think, it's really important to think about what kind of business do you really want to have, and then how that connects again with your skill set, and then what sort of resources. We were talking about the execution in sales. If you're not the detailed person, if you're not the follow through, if that's not you, then you've got to have the people to pass that baton to be able to fulfill those commitments if you want to continue to stay in business. So I think all of those things, play a role. And then of course, the timing and the market opportunity. A lot of young people today, everybody wants to be the social influencer, travel around, do all this, right? 10 years ago, that was much more profitable than today with the competition online and what's happening. Now it's, that many more eyeballs, that many more videos, that many more podcasts. So, all these things kind of play into, or should play into, decision making. And I, of course, did not. I just jumped in.
Same. Yeah, I'll say I jumped in, but I also know that my most recent transition, right? When I left the corporate career to launch Call the Damn Leads, there was probably a 6 to 9 month lead up before I left, because I'll never forget, I called one of my mentors and was like, I'm done with this place. I'm out of here. Like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to start my business. And he said, well, hold on now. Before you jump, if you haven't jumped off the ship already, let's talk this out. And he was like, what you're most, he's kind of said the same thing. You're most qualified for the position you're in right now. He's like, so knowing that, if you were to laterally translate into that position in your own business, what is missing for you to be able to be in that role? And it's like, well, I wouldn't have a sales team or a marketing department or a giant bank account to be stroking checks to everybody that I would need to hire to do those things. So yeah, that's pretty fair to say. Okay. And I was like, all right, well, and then if you did have to start over and you have a totally new market, how are you going to get in front of those individuals? Are you sure that you have the correct messaging for that audience? And is it the right time? Because, if you do it right now, you're dealing with X, Y, and Z, versus 6 months from now when it's a different season and certain people are making certain kinds of decisions. Would it be more logical to maybe think about doing it then when you have more of these resources? Like, it's really nice to have someone that you can kind of bounce these ideas off of and know that they've been down the path before, so that you aren't, totally trying to figure it out alone. And, Becky, I know you have a ton of content for how people can learn and go down this path. So I could probably nerd out on this stuff with you all day long, but I want to be respectful of your time. What's the best way for me and the listeners and everyone to come learn more about your content, your books, all the things that you do to help people?
The website, probably the easiest, BeckyHeidesch.com. My executive search site is WSSexecutivesearch.com, but BeckyHeidesch.com, they can find me directly.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I drop that all down in the show, the show notes and everything, so we can come and find you and check you out. Now, before we get out of here, the thing that I love most about sales is that there's always opportunity afoot. So there's probably someone new who's joined sales today, and by the stroke of God's luck, let's just hope that they landed on this podcast when they went to Google and said, hey, how do I do better at sales? And what advice would you give that individual? Just one thing that they can just take and implement every day?
I'm sorry, Drewby. I think you cut off there a little bit. Would you mind repeating?
Yeah. So because sales has always got new people coming in, new people going out, if someone is lucky enough to find us on, this episode today, they're just getting started in sales. Can you give them just one piece of advice that they can implement every day and know that they'll be successful if they do so?
Well, I'm a big write it down list kind of thing. And, if you can focus on three things to move the ball down the field every single day, it's one, two, three, but move the ball down the field. Take some
I
sort of
love it.
action.
That's part of my daily routine every day. What are my MITs, my most important tasks? I write them down, I get them done, and I feel like I've had a successful day. So I love that advice. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us. I truly appreciate it. If you guys are listening and you enjoyed the show, share it on social media, send it to a colleague, send it to someone who's absolutely terrible at sales, and tell them that they need to learn a thing or two. Because that's what this is all about. It's about helping each other learn, grow, and get better. And if you have a story and you want to share it on the show, we'd love to have you. Head over to callthedamnleads.com/podcast. Send us your information. We'll get you booked in. We'll bring you on, because just like my new friend Becky, anyone who has made a life for themselves in sales has a story. And Becky, I'm grateful you took some time to share yours with us today.
Thanks for having me, Drew B. Nice to be here.
You're very welcome. You guys know what to do next. Go call the damn leads. We'll see you on the next one.